The year is 1229. The setting is the Kingdom of Bohemia, a land shrouded in the mists of superstition and ruled by the iron grip of the Church. Deep within the Crudum region, isolated from the rest of the world by dense, wolf-infested forests, stood the Benedictine monastery of Podlesis. It was a place of stone and silence, a fortress of faith where men went to die to the world and live only for God. But within these sacred walls, a darkness was festering, a shadow that would soon give birth to the most accursed object in human history. Among the brothers, there was one whose name would be erased from the Book of Life but burned forever into the pages of legend, Herman the Recluse. Herman was not a simple monk. He was a scholar, a man of intense intellect and burning curiosity. But curiosity, in the eyes of the 13th century church, was often the gateway to damnation. The exact nature of Herman's transgression has been debated for 8 centuries. Some chronicles suggest he broke his vow of chastity, engaging in a carnal affair that defiled the sanctity of the order. Others whisper of a darker sin, that Herman had begun to question the scriptures themselves, dabbling in the forbidden arts of alchemy and necromancy in the solitude of his cell. Whatever the deed, it was considered unforgivable. It was a breach of the Benedictine rule so severe that it threatened the spiritual standing of the entire monastery. The day of judgment was cold and gray. The wind howled through the cloisters like a funeral dirge. Herman was dragged from his cell, his robes stripped of their insignias, his feet bare against the freezing flagstones. He was brought before the abbot and the council of elders in the chapter house. The room was illuminated only by the flickering light of tallow candles, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to mock the trembling monk. The abbot sat on his high wooden chair, his face a mask of granite, devoid of pity or warmth. "Brother Herman," the abbot's voice boomed, echoing off the cold stone walls. "You have been found guilty of a heinous crime against God, against your brothers, and against the holy order of Saint Benedict. You have stained this house with your sin. There is no penance in this life that can wash you clean." Herman fell to his knees, the rough stone biting into his skin. He knew the punishment for such crimes. He expected excommunication, perhaps banishment to the wilderness, but the abbot's next words froze the blood in his veins. "The council has decided," the abbot pronounced, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "To purge the sin from your soul, the body must suffer the ultimate confinement. You are to be walled up alive." Immurement. It was the most feared sentence in the medieval world. It meant being placed in a small niche within the foundation of the monastery. Brick by brick, the light would be stolen from you. You would be left in total darkness, with only a small pocket of air to die of thirst, starvation, and sheer terror. It was not a quick death. It was a slow descent into madness. "No!" Herman screamed, his composure shattering. "Mercy! Father, I beg you, any punishment but that. Do not bury me in the dark." "The sentence is final," the abbot stated, rising from his chair. "Preparation begins at dawn. Make your peace with God, for you shall see the sun no more." Terror, primal and overwhelming, seized Herman's mind. He looked at the faces of his brothers. Some looked away in shame, others watched with grim satisfaction. He was alone. He needed a way out. He needed to offer them something so valuable, so undeniably miraculous, that they would be forced to spare his life. His mind raced through the library of his knowledge. What did the monastery desire above all else? Glory. eternal recognition, a relic that would make Podlaziz the envy of Christendom. "Wait!" Herman cried out, scrambling forward. "I can make restitution. I can bring glory to this house that will last until the end of days. I will write a book, not just a book, the book. A volume that contains the sum of all human knowledge. The Old Testament, the New Testament, the etymology, the history of Bohemia, everything. I will write it all in a single volume." The heavy oak door of the cell slammed shut, and the iron bolt slid into place with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Herman was alone. The cell was small, damp, and smelled of mold and old wax. On the desk before him lay a mountain of vellum, processed skins of over 160 donkeys, pale and waiting. Beside them sat jars of ink, lampblack for the text, cinnabar for the red rubrication, crushed lapis lazuli for the blue, and real gold leaf for the illuminations. The sun had already set. The monastery was silent, save for the distant chanting of the Compline prayers. Herman sat at the desk, his hand trembling as he picked up the quill. He dipped it into the black ink and touched it to the first sheet. "In principio creavit Deus," he wrote. He wrote with a speed born of terror. His hand flew across the page, forming perfect Gothic script, the lettera nigra. But the laws of time were cruel. The candle burned down, marking the passing hours. 1 hour, 2 hours. He had completed only a few pages. The stack of blank vellum loomed beside him, a white tower of impossibility. It mocked him. Even if he wrote faster than a human heart could beat, he would not finish one section of the Bible, let alone the encyclopedia of the world. Midnight approached, the witching hour. The cold of the cell seeped into his bones. His hand cramped, the muscles seizing in agony. He dropped the quill. It splattered ink onto the floor. Herman stared at the stain, realizing the futility of his task. He was going to die. The wall was waiting. The darkness of the masonry would be his tomb. He looked at the small wooden crucifix hanging on the wall. "God," he whispered, his voice cracking, "grant me a miracle. Stop the sun. Guide my hand." But the crucifix remained silent. The candle flickered, casting shadows that looked like grasping claws. Herman realized then that heaven would not intervene. God respected the laws of nature. God did not grant shortcuts to sinners who tried to bribe their way out of punishment. Despair turned into a dark, cold resolve. If the light would not help him, he had only one other place to turn. He stood up, turning his back on the crucifix. He closed his eyes and began to speak, not a prayer of the church, but an invocation he had read in the forbidden texts. "I call to the darkness," Herman's voice trembled, then grew stronger. "I call to the fallen one, to the lightbringer, Lucifer." The air in the cell instantly changed. The temperature plummeted, freezing the breath in Herman's lungs. The candle flames turned a sickly, vivid blue and stood perfectly still. The shadows in the corners of the room detached themselves from the stone. They swirled, coalescing into a form that was both magnificent and terrifying. From the void, he stepped forward. The devil. He did not appear as a beast, but as a figure of dark majesty, clad in robes of midnight. The devil did not pick up a quill. He simply raised his hand. Suddenly, the cell erupted into a whirlwind of activity. The stack of vellum lifted into the air, the pages swirling like leaves in a storm. The quills stood up, dipped themselves into the ink, and began to write on the floating pages. It was a symphony of dark magic. Herman watched in horror and awe. The text appeared instantaneously, perfect, uniform, flawless. The illuminations bloomed like flowers in fast motion, red, blue, gold, green. The Bible, the histories, the spells, the calendars, all of it was being seared onto the animal skin by an invisible, infernal force. The sound was deafening, the scratching of 100 pens, the rustling of parchment, the hissing of drying ink. Herman sat paralyzed as the hours blurred. He was no longer the writer, he was the witness. As the first hint of gray light touched the window, the whirlwind ceased. The pages stacked themselves neatly. The book was finished. It was enormous, 3 feet tall, weighing 165 pounds. The devil stood by the open book. He pointed to page 290. There, staring back at Herman, was a full-page portrait of the devil himself, green-faced, horned, with a forked tongue, wearing an ermine loincloth as a mockery of royalty. "It is done," the devil whispered, his form fading as the morning bell began to toll. "They will call it a wonder of God, but you and I know the truth. This is the devil's Bible." The sun rose over Podlasic. The heavy door of the cell creaked open. The abbot and the executioners stood there, bricks and mortar at the ready, expecting to drag a weeping, broken man to his doom. Instead, they found Herman standing calmly beside a book so large it seemed to distort the room around it. The abbot stepped forward, disbelief etched on his face. He opened the massive cover. He turned the pages. He saw the flawless calligraphy, the intricate art, the sheer volume of text that would have taken a lifetime to produce. He checked the ink. It was dry. He checked the content. It was accurate. "Miraculum," the abbot breathed, crossing himself. "A miracle of the Lord." Herman was spared. The monastery celebrated him as a saintly figure touched by divine grace. But Herman knew better. As the years passed, he did not find peace. The image on page 290 haunted his dreams. The moment the book entered Sedlec, death followed. A catastrophic plague swept through the region. The famous bone church of Sedlec Ossuary owes its abundance of skeletons to this era. Thousands died. The ground turned sour. The Cistercians, terrified by the dark aura radiating from the tome, returned it to Podlasic, desperate to be rid of the devil's gift. But the book could not save Podlasic. In the 15th century, the Hussite Wars erupted, a bloody religious conflict that tore Bohemia apart. The Hussites, zealous and violent, targeted the monasteries. They shelled Podlasic, stormed the walls, and butchered the monks. The monastery was burned to the ground. Amidst the inferno, amidst the charred wood and melted stone, one object remained untouched: the Codex Gigas. The fire refused to consume it. For centuries, the book traveled through the hands of the powerful, acting as a magnet for madness. It eventually arrived at the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolf II, in Prague. Rudolf was a man obsessed with the occult, a collector of oddities who valued alchemists more than advisors. He became fixated on the Codex. He spent nights staring at the devil's portrait, convinced the book held the secret to the philosopher's stone. The curse worked slowly on Rudolf. It did not kill him. It broke his mind. He became paranoid, convinced his family was plotting against him. He locked himself in his castle, neglecting his empire. His madness grew until his own brother Matthias stripped him of power. Rudolf died a broken, lonely man, leaving the Codex in the gloomy halls of Prague Castle, waiting for the next catastrophe. That catastrophe arrived in 1648. The 30 Years' War was ending, but the bloodshed was not. The Swedish army, commanded by Queen Christina's generals, besieged Prague. The city fell. The soldiers were not interested in liberation. They were interested in loot. They sacked the castle, stealing paintings, statues, and gold. But the greatest prize, the crown jewel of the loot, was the Black Book. The soldiers heaved the 75-kilogram tome onto a wagon, carrying it north, away from its homeland, to the cold lands of Sweden. The journey was treacherous, but the book survived, arriving in Stockholm to be placed in the royal collection. For 50 years, the Codex Gigas sat in the royal castle Tre Kronor in Stockholm. It was a curiosity, a relic of a barbarous age. But on May 7, 1697, the curse awoke with a vengeance. A fire broke out in the castle. It was not a normal blaze. Witnesses described it as erupting with unnatural speed, consuming the dry timber of the medieval fortress like kindling soaked in oil. The royal library was located high in the tower. The flames licked at the doors, trapping the priceless collection inside. Panic ensued. Servants and librarians scrambled through the smoke, choking on the heat. They grabbed what they could, but the codex was too heavy. It was a giant. As the floor began to groan under the heat, a decision was made. They could not carry it down the stairs. "The window!" a librarian screamed. "Throw it out the window!" It took several men to lift the massive volume. With a heave of desperation, they shoved the Codex Gigas out of the fourth-story window. It plummeted through the smoke-filled air, a dark meteorite crashing down to the courtyard below. The impact was devastating. The heavy leather binding burst open. The book struck a bystander below, reportedly injuring him severely, but the book itself survived the fall. However, in that chaotic moment, as the book hit the ground and the binding snapped, several pages came loose. They fluttered away into the smoke, carried off by the updraft of the inferno. Those pages are missing to this day. There is a gap in the text immediately following the picture of the devil. What was on those pages? Scholars argue they contained the dry monastic rules of the Benedictine order. But the legend says otherwise. Occultists believe those pages contained the prayer of the shadow, the specific incantation Herman used to summon the devil. Perhaps Lucifer reclaimed those pages to ensure no other mortal could bind him so easily again. Or perhaps someone in the courtyard, seeing the pages fall, snatched them up, hiding the dark magic for themselves. Today, the Codex Gigas rests in the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. It is no longer chained to a wooden table, but imprisoned behind thick, bulletproof glass in a climate-controlled vault.